Special episode tonight, Two Good Sports. Hope you're all well at home first and foremost, and everything's going well. We advertised last week that we've got a one of the good guys of footy coming to join us, and apart from that, a bloke who's achieved a lot in his time. And welcome, Scott Sattler. Good to have you, mate.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Good to join you, Hamo.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Greggy, you want to kick it off, mate? Because
yeah, mate.
You're the nerdlinger of the two of us.
Oh, as the nerdlinger, I had a little bit of a look up on your stats there, Scotty. You played 202 games between 1992 and 2004 over, a few clubs there. You were coached by Wally, coached by Phil Economides, Mark Murray, Bob Linder, of course, Royce. You got Johnny Lang there, Timmy Sheens. Just one thing I just wanted to ask you, mate. One thing you took away from, you don't have to go through each club or each iteration, like with Gold Coast, you've been there twice, but what you took away from the club and the coaches?
Yeah, it's a good question to start off with, Greggy, because Wally, I was only 19. There was myself and Jamie Goddard and Kevin Campion, Adrian Vowes. We were all playing in the under-21s at the Gold Coast Seagulls, and all I ever wanted to do growing up as a kid is not play for South Sydney because that was my dad's club. All I ever wanted to do was play for the Gold Coast Giants. I grew up on the Gold Coast, and I just thought that even though the Gold Coast Giants were only a very young club, I looked up to everyone that played there, and they didn't have a lot of success. But when I got the opportunity in under-21s, and then Wally Lewis was the coach, he gave myself and Jamie Goddard and Kevin Campion and Adrian Vowes a shot in first grade. What I took from Wally was, don't overcomplicate things. Just what your natural ability is. Just continue to use your natural ability and don't let anyone change it. And I really took a lot of that from Wally really early on in my career. And I sort of lost my way, I think, for about 2 or 3 years. About 2 years, I lost my way in relation to where I was going to go with my footy. The Super League was sort of being entered into negotiations with players, and I was at the Roosters and South Queensland Crushers there. Didn't really overly enjoy myself at those clubs for a number of reasons. But when you fast forward to like Phil Economides, his approach to rugby league was all about just have fun, just be a really close-knit playing group and have as much fun as humanly possible together. And I thought that was really important. Because I lost my way for a couple of years there in relation to my commitment to the game. I didn't train as hard as what I usually did as a young guy for a couple of years there. And so I decided that I was going to go back to where it all started, back on the Gold Coast, which was then the Chargers. And Phil Economides really taught me to enjoy my rugby league again. And we had good success in that 97 year. We made the finals in the ARL comp, and we had a really good group of players. And then fast forward to Royce Simmons. Royce Simmons really taught you how to be fit and go to another level of fitness, and also had a lot of really good game plans around footy. John Lane didn't have a game plan at all. It was just about make it as simple as possible. Don't make a mistake. If you've got the right players in your side, you'll win the games more often than not. And then Tim Sheens, just an absolute genius. I wish I had Tim Sheens as an 18-year-old because he had this great fascination of the game, and he looked at it from a completely different angle. And everything that was all about the basics of the game. So before every training session, you had to pass 100 to the left, 100 to the right, 100 from dummy half to the left, 100 to the dummy half to the right, just so you got used to those real basics of the game. So he was a tremendous coach. He was in my final year, Timmy Sheens. I thoroughly enjoyed his coaching.
Is there any club we had Bowsy on a little while ago, last year, and he talked about a couple of clubs that he almost went to. I guess particularly the as you mentioned, the Super League war was just about to start. There were a couple he mentioned. I think it was from Newcastle, from memory, and maybe North Sydney. A couple of clubs that you were close to going to, mate?
I was close to going to South as an 18-year-old, but I decided not to because, again, I just said that was my dad's club. Yep. And then I nearly went to Bradford, actually, when Bradford were at their peak. And it was before I went down to Penrith. And I was coming off contract at the Gold Coast Chargers. And I got contacted by the London Broncos in Bradford. And I didn't take it because I felt as though I hadn't achieved enough here in Australia yet. Yep. So I stayed and went to Penrith, fortunately enough. But because of the salary cap, and I was 31 at Penrith, we just about to win the comp. We hadn't won it yet, but during that year, I was told that I was no longer, I wasn't going to be part of the plans moving forward, because we had a lot of really good young players coming through, Waterhouse and Luke Lewis and Luke Rooney, those players. And so I had to find a club. And I was nearly going to go to South again, but again, I made a decision not to go there. But I remember the one that stands out for me the most is when I was at the Gold Coast Chargers, I was negotiating with 3 clubs. I was negotiating with Penrith, Manly, and the Rabbitohs. And I remember saying to my dad, I said, Dad, I'm talking to 3 clubs. And he said, who are they? I said, Penrith, Manly, and South. He said, okay. He said, what, are you going to go to South? I said, no, I don't want to go to South because we play the same number, 13.
Yep.
And I don't want to go there because that's your legacy. And he goes, okay, right, I can appreciate that. I said, and he said, well, I said, so it's out of Manly and Penrith. And he said, well, if you go to Manly, I just want to tell you, I'll never watch you play another game of rugby league. So it made it pretty easy. I went to Penrith. So that was it.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because obviously, he'd have a bit of a grudge, I guess, and understandably with Manly. I remember as a young kid, Sats, when we used to go up to Lang Park with our fathers, and I think you broke his heart one night the first time you wore the Queensland jumper up there, for him being a proud New South Welshman. And I think you might have been, I'm a few years older than you might have been about 9 or 10, and you wore a Queensland jumper up. Dad wasn't wrapped with that, was he?
No, he wasn't, because he was actually, at some stage during those late 80s, early 90s, he was part of the New South Wales selection committee as well. So I idolised Mal Meninga, and it was from the state league days. Remember Hamo when they'd come down and play at Owen Park on the Gold Coast against the Gold Coast Vikings. And
they had the old Kentucky Fried Chicken jersey.
They did too, yeah. So when South Magpies used to come to Lang Park, and I used to idolise, Gary Belcher and Mal Meninga and Ash Lumbie and Bruce Astor, all these great Brisbane rugby league. Yeah, Brad Sully. So I remember seeing Mal Meninga. And I would have only been 8 or 9. I just remember looking at him going, and he was a police officer, and I thought, this guy he epitomises everything that I'd love to be. So I followed South Magpies, and because he started playing for Queensland, I just followed Queensland because that's all I knew. I'd grown up in Queensland. But my dad was absolutely devastated that I followed Queensland.
Yeah, I remember that. Greggy?
Yeah, just following on from your, the clubs there, I was just wanting to ask you there, Sats, probably a question for myself that I was keen to know. Who's your best clubman? Doesn't have to be the best player, but the best clubman that you played with. Well, you can name a few, like the different clubs there, but, like somebody like Darren Centre sort of stands out to me, somebody who, seemed like a good bloke to have around and, did the right thing, trained hard and all that. Just your point of view.
Yeah, I only played 1 year with Darren Centre at the Tigers. It was my last year. But the clubman is a really good question because, they're the guys that really fly under the radar a lot of the time. They're so important to a side. They become like the spiritual leader. But for me, the real great clubman that I played with is Jamie Goddard. And he didn't fly under the radar because he was a great player. But outside of that, he was just a typical country boy, but it was no frills. Like if you stuffed up, he'd tell you straight away. But he had this ability to galvanise a club together as well, and he really led the way in relation to toughness from training and playing through pain. And I remember one game we had to go off, both he and I had to go off and get stitches once, and the doctor could only do one at a time. So while he was doing me, he grabbed the little hook and with the string in it, the doc had already laced up, ready for him next, and he just started stitching himself without the needles. And I was going, he just an absolute lunatic, but he just had this great ability to bring a club together. And at Penrith, Tony Pulatua, the back rower, one of the Hair Bears.
One half of the Hair Bears.
He was just a tremendous guy, really light-hearted, very humorous, could play. Was just one of the most devastating back rowers in his day, but just had this innate ability to just bring a group of guys together and do it just through his humour and his just the interactive nature that he had.
Yeah. Look, you mentioned Jamie Goddard, and we had Campo and Valsey on, as I mentioned a little while ago, and they both mentioned Jamie Goddard. It was a similar question. So, look, mate, on your show recently, your Sports Day show with Badge, you mentioned you're talking about the importance of how young blokes can come to a club and get a little bit lost and get off the track, especially today, I guess, compared to 10, 20 years ago. And you mentioned the importance of being a young fella, and finding a mentor. How was that for you, and who was it?
Yeah, it's I was fortunate enough for me, Hamo, that I had a pretty strict upbringing with my dad, and you and I grew up together in the pubs. The pubs all around the Gold Coast, and like you said, you're a little bit older than me, but I was fortunate enough to have a really good mentor in my dad who really set myself straight. The last name really pulled me up from being I'd like to think I tried not to be a dickhead too many times off the field, and I was never a big drinker when I played because I saw the effect that alcohol had on so many families living in pubs. We lived in all the pubs, as you know, that we owned over the years, and I just saw the effect that alcohol had on families, and so I didn't drink a lot when I played. I was always out with the guys, but just was one of those guys who was really happy with being in the moment. And I used to only have 3 drinks a year, which was when we played the Cowboys because it was a great night out. Brisbane, because you hook up with a lot of your mates you went to school with or played footy with, and your end of season drink as well. So a lot of the other times I tried to stay pretty clean, and so when I came into grade at the Gold Coast Seagulls, there was a guy that came up from Canberra. His name was Brent Todd, premiership winning front rower.
Yeah, played for New Zealand front rower.
He did too. He was just a tremendous guy, and he came from a club that had a lot of success, and so I used to find myself morphing towards him at training a lot, and just sort of hanging around him. I used to watch a lot of the things that he used to do at training, and because he'd come from so much success, I found that if I watched the things that he did and tried to replicate them the best way I could, I'd probably be on a pretty good path as well. So, one, it was the last name that kept me on the straight and narrow, I think, because I always felt as though if I was going to try and defile the family name in rugby league, well, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. And then outside of that, having Brent Todd really early on in the career, was a tremendous guy, and he really looked after the young guys as well.
Well, that would have done a full 180, I guess. That's near the end of your career. You would have, taken that role on. Maybe you didn't ask for it, but I'm sure there were a couple of kids, young blokes who were starting off, went to you and, did the full circle, I suppose.
Yeah, at Penrith, we had a lot of young players. When we won the comp in 2003, we had 9 local juniors in the side, and about 5 of those were still in their teens. And so I was a player who used to love doing extras before and after training, and there was like to do that as well. And we used to have a few of the younger players. It's easy to say to players, this is how you do extras, be disciplined, but it's really hard to know actually what to do. So we found that guys like Luke Lewis and Joel Clinton and those young front rows, Ben Ross, they'd come to you a lot of the times and just ask for advice about how to do extra training. And then before you knew it, they were staying there longer than you, and they were turning up there earlier than you as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was really good to drag some of those guys along and just do a fair bit of training with them and just teach them the importance of doing extras and being disciplined, and therefore it just becomes part and parcel of their preparation. So, but like I said, I'd turn up to training, an hour before training and to go and do some extras. And guys like Luke Lewis and Luke Rooney, they were already there. They'd been there another 15 or 20 minutes. So, and it's not something you go looking for either. It's just something that naturally you just find players like I did as a young player. They just end up tagging along without you actually inviting. They tag along, and you just be doing a few little extras, a little drills with them. And then before you know it, they're taking over their own little sessions as well.
Yep.
Yeah, incredible year when you think about the 2003 Sats. You were 150 to 1, I think, there at one stage. The bookies had you guys at. And, you turned around. I think maybe even a semi-final, they had the top 8 back then. You might have beaten the Dragons 31-30. And that was another point there. If they happen to win that game, who knows what happens. But it was just one of those years. Everything seemed to click. I was watching the highlights reel, I think, on TV last night, where you beat North Queensland in extra time. How was that year for you?
Great. It started 2 years before, guys, because in 2001, Royce Simmons was the coach. He was a great coach, Royce. I love him. He's still a very close friend of mine. And we came last, stone motherless last. And we used to get food thrown at us from our fans. Our houses would get vandalized because they were so passionate about their footy. And 2002, John Lang came along. We weren't much better. We came third last, I think. And then 2003, after 5 rounds, we were still running. It might have been 14th or 13th. We lost our first 2 games. We got embarrassed by Melbourne in round 2. John Lang actually said to us in the dressing shed after the game, everyone needs to have a good hard look at themselves and decide whether they want to be a first grade footy player, because at the moment I don't see too many in this room, and we're going to make a decision about who we're going to cut before June 30. We come out the following week against the Roosters, the premiers, and we beat them. We beat them 23-22, I think it was. And but after round 5, and we had a bye in round 6, and we weren't travelling that well. But we went over to New Zealand in round 7, I think it was, or round 8, and we beat them really convincingly. And they were grand finalists the year before. And we sort of said to ourselves, you know what, we can make the 8, I think, with this team. And then all of a sudden we went on a run where we couldn't get beaten. I think we went on an 8 or 9 streak run. We got beaten in between that. And then from that on, we never got beaten again after that. We got beaten by the Roosters. I tell a lie. Leading into the finals, we got beaten by the Roosters at home really convincingly. And but we were able to injure Brad Fittler in that game. Tony Puletua ragdolled him, and he popped his shoulder out, Freddie. And it actually come back to help us in the grand final because Freddie wasn't on his game that night. You could tell he couldn't pass from left to right. And so that whole year was a real learning curve for the young players, but they just knew how to win. They'd come from all these junior rep teams in Penrith where they'd won a lot of comps. Us older guys learned how to win again from those guys. We taught them how to train hard, I think. And then it all sort of came to fruition throughout the finals where we beat the Broncos in week 1 when we were behind by, I think, 2 tries. We beat the Warriors in week 3 to make their way through to the grand final. We always had the wood on the Warriors. And without sounding too arrogant, we just knew by playing the Roosters in the grand final, for some reason, we just knew how to get over the Roosters in big games at Penrith, even when we were coming last in 2001. Yeah. So, you know, grand final night, it was dark, it was stormy, we wore black jerseys. It was just the whole theme, the theme of the whole night was set up for us to cause a massive, even though we were the minor premiers, everyone still to this day still thinks it's a massive boil over.
Was that the quickest? I remember watching it. It seemed like the quickest grand final I'd seen. Did it feel like that to you? It was incredibly quick.
It's funny you should say that, Greg, because I remember seeing a statistic only about 3 or 4 years ago. It would have been 3 or 4 years ago. Actually, it was just before the 2015 grand final, and they said still to date that 2003 grand final was the fastest game that was ever played, even including Origins, because. And they took into account there was only 3 penalties in the game, so there was no stoppages. Not a lot of balls went into touch, and not a lot of balls went over the dead ball line. So the ball was kept in play for a large portion of that game. And I think the 2015 game, I think that overlapped it and became the fastest game after that.
Right. Well, so it's 2003. Obviously, you know, that great grand final win. And, that was a watershed year for you. You won the premiership. You also represented your beloved Queensland. What a year for you in that year. Like, it's just, that was just the, you know, I guess when you look back on your career, that's one that stands out.
Yeah, it does. And getting picked at Origin at 31, Hamo, was, it is a surprise, and it's not when you're a Queenslander, because they've been renowned for picking people late in their careers ever since, you know, 1980, the first year. So if you're a New South Welshman and you got picked at 31, you sort of think, well, you know, that's a jack in the box. But in saying that, I didn't think I was going to get picked. I never gave up hope of not getting picked. I always thought there's half a chance if your team is going very well. And I remember I was standing at school waiting to pick my young bloke up. He was only, was he 5? I think he was 5 at that stage. And he was in his first year, like kinder, and I was picking him up from school, and my best mate rang me, who'd also won a comp with Newcastle, Clinton O'Brien. He rang me and he said to me, "Oh, well done." I said, "What for?" He said, "You've just been picked in the Origin team." I said, "No, I haven't. You're talking shit." He said, No. He said, "It's just been announced." I went, "But I haven't even heard from the QRL." So I got home, I got a phone from the QRL, and before I knew it, I packed a bag and I was on the next flight to Brisbane and got room with Petro Sivanasiva, and I was 31, he was like 23, and I looked up to him like a god, you know. And
yeah.
I remember the first night we stayed in this one hotel the first night, and there was a queen size bed and a single bed, and Petro's 6'3", 6'4", 110 kilos. I'm 6 foot on a good day and 94 kilos, and he said, "Oh, Sats, you can have the queen size bed." I said, "Petro," he's the nicest guy in the world. I said, "Petro, now, you've played 6 or 7 first grade Origins, I should say. You've won a comp. You've won a couple of comps. you take the queen size bed and I'll make you a cup of tea. How many sugars do you have? But it was a great year for myself.
Yeah.
It was and I'll tell you what, is John Lang played a huge part because he was able to strip a lot of things back in your game because he just made everything really simple.
Yep. Mate, how did you, before both games, just briefly, how did you cope with the night before and also the morning before? Because I've heard a lot of people playing in these big games, they've talked about they played the game in their head too many times, and I guess there's a fine line between being too relaxed and too switched on. How did you go about that with these games?
Well, I used to be a real up until 1995, and so I was still a young guy. Then I used to get really built up before the game. I used to get really anxious. I remember former Manly back row John Jones, who I'm still really good mates with today.
Juggy, wasn't it?
Juggy, yeah.
Jones, is that right?
Yeah, he came up to the Crushers, and he could see before the very first Crushers game that was ever played in 95 against Canberra, he could see that I was really nervous and I was really intense. And he said, just relax, loosen up. Don't play the game now because you'll be buggered after 15 minutes when you get out there. From that day on, I became really relaxed before games. And I was probably too relaxed before games, I thought, until the 2-minute buzzer went. When the 2-minute buzzer went, which goes off in every dressing shed, that means you've got 2 minutes before you're running out. That's when the butterflies start building. But I was actually really relaxed before big games. Before the Origin, I was really relaxed, and maybe that comes with experience. But I remember before the grand final, as a whole group, we were just so relaxed. And I used to always be the last. I had a really strict preparation routine before game, and not before. I didn't do too much. Just watch the footy. Had the same meal before every game, and then the grand final night, I used to go and always get strapped last. So I'll go and watch the second grade play, and our second grade was playing in the grand final that night as well. So I remember watching them. And I remember looking up at the big screen, and I hadn't gone in to get strapped yet, and it was raining, and they showed both dressing sheds, and they showed an image on the big screen of the Roosters dressing shed, and they showed Anthony Minicello, and he was just so nervous. You could see how built up and anxious he was. And then they showed our dressing room. They showed Preston Campbell he was waving and laughing at the camera, and there was a couple of guys playing cards in the dressing sheds, and to me, that sort of set a really good scene for how we approached the game and how I approached the game. So I went in and I remember getting strapped up and just sort of sitting there and going, I've been playing 12 seasons now. I think you deserve to have a little bit of luck in your life. So, don't make too much of the situation. Just, you can't control the situation until you get out there. So I was really, really not really nervous. I was really, really relaxed before a lot of really big games.
Yep.
Yeah. Just wanted to ask you, mate, if there was any other sport that you would have taken up, if rugby league wasn't it, what was another sport you were interested in as a kid and that you thought you might have made a, not necessarily career, but something you might have went on and played a bit longer for, if possible?
I hated rugby union. I went to boarding school for 3 years. Just absolutely despised.
Nudgy. Did you get nudgy?
Oh, nudgy. Despised everything about rugby union. But when I was 11 years old, my dad dropped me down to the Ashmore PCYC.
Yep.
And I started doing some boxing there. Yep. And I remember I used to put on just actual bandages that you put on wounds. I was using those as my wraps for my hands, and I used to go down once a week with a very good friend of mine's dad. Used to take us down there. I did that for a lot of years, and always and still today, it's still my second favourite sport. I can't get enough of boxing, reading books and documentaries, whatever it may be. So probably if I didn't play rugby league, I may have gone down the path of maybe trying to see if I could do something there, because I just love the sport, and I admired the sport and the athletes in it so much.
Yep.
Good one.
Mate, you know what I'm going to ask you here, Sats, because we sent a thing out to our on our social media the other day, asking you about that famous tackle. Look, you mentioned your dad. Your dad's made his own legacy, and you've made your own. Every time there's a grand final, you're in the highlight reels there, mate. Just briefly, tell us about how that came about and what was going through your mind with you and Todd Byrne.
It was, the circumstance itself wasn't new to me, because John Lang, when he came to Penrith in 2002 and I was a lock forward, he sort of prepared me for the moment, funny enough, because he said to me when he came there and we had our one-on-one meeting, he said, Sats, I want my lock forwards to play like an old-fashioned lock forward. He said, so what I mean by that, he said, on tackle 5, he said, if you're on the other side of the field and the ball's on the opposite side, he said, I just want you to start running in behind the defensive line just in case. He used to always say, just in case you need it. And so for every training session and every game for 2 years, I did exactly that and was never needed. But on my last game for Penrith in a grand final, again, we're fifth to the last, and Ryan Girdler was standing next to me on the left-hand side. And for some reason, he just took off to the right-hand side, which he used to do that quite a bit, Girds. He never used to like to stay on his left-hand side. He just roamed around the field. And he took off, and I remember looking at him and going, where's he going? And he grabbed the ball and put the kick in. And as he grabbed the ball, I thought, oh, John Lang's always top. So I just started sort of heading off just in case I was needed. And then when the ball ricocheted and Freddie picked it up and gave it to Toddy Byrne, and Luke Lewis just got an arm on him, was able to sort of rattle him a little bit, and Toddy got away. And by that stage, I'd already gotten to a really good stride. So, yeah, to be quite honest, guys, I was thinking first and foremost, I was just thinking like anyone does when you're chasing, I just want to stop him from going around underneath the goalpost, because it was 6-6 at that stage. And I thought if he can score in the corner and make the kick hard for Craig Fitzgibbon, it still gives us a real good chance. So, but because it was a wet night and it wasn't one for the speedsters, it was one for the mud runners, and I just started gaining a lot more sort of traction on him, and I thought he was going to come inside at one stage, and when you watch it, I sort of pulled up a little bit because I thought he was going to come inside, but I heard Reece Wesser yell at me, and it's funny, you can't hear a thing on those big nights. There's 85,000, you can't hear a thing. It's just stony silence. But I remember hearing Reece, and my nickname was Scooter, and I remember hearing Reece yell out, "Go Scooter, I've got you." And it was the only noise I could hear the whole time. So I just remember taking off, and fortunately enough for me, he just kept going down that sideline, and I was able to get really good, real good contact on him because it was a slippery night. We slid into touch, and to be able to turn around and see my teammates run in, and that's probably the most pleasing part of it all, is that your teammates look at you as a person that's helped them out, and that's all you ever want to do as a player.
Well, that's the beauty of rugby league, isn't it, too?
Yeah, it's funnily enough, I remember when I slid into touch and I turned around to look at Reece Wesser. I turned around and looked back in the field, and I turned around to say to Reece, "Thanks very much." Reece was that far away that if he stepped inside, Reece wouldn't have got him. I tell you what he did. He actually lied to me and put me in a really good positive frame of mind.
That was a good lie.
Yeah,
mate. Just quickly from me, I'll pass it over to Greggy, because I know you've got a couple of things to do too, Sats. You've made the transition to the media really successfully, and without pissing in your pocket, you and Gary Belch do a great job on Sports Day. We were talking about it just recently. What we like about it, it's analytical. It's a lot of advice there. It's really in depth. How have you made that transition, Sats? You seem to have made it pretty seamlessly, really, like from your playing career to now.
Funnily enough, Hammer, I used to always embrace the media when I played. I thought, one, don't treat them like outcasts.
Yep. 2,
they can really hurt your career. And if you embrace them and make yourself open to them, they can really enhance your career as well.
Yep.
So I always did that. And I've got some really good friends in media, Paul Kent, James Hooper, Peter Bedell. They're really good mates of mine, and they've always remained really close friends. And I got that through just from playing rugby league. But I remember in 2004, Peter Flingos was one of the great journalists in rugby league. He passed away suddenly, heart attack. And up until that time, it was in my last year of my career, and I was actually just went to 2GB, and I just said to them, and I'd been on the footy show a fair bit during my career, and I said to 2GB, Ray Hadley and the crew, I just said, listen, if you ever want a current player just to come in, just free of charge, just come in and just be part of the contiguous call team, I'd be more than happy to give my time up. And I just was able to go in on a couple of occasions. And then in 2004, Chippy Flingos passed away suddenly, and Ray Hadley and Bob Fulton and Steve Blocker Roach and those guys who were they're part of that crew, they were so traumatised by Chippy's passing that they just didn't want to go on air for an extended period of time. So 2GB had said to me, listen, can you come and fill in if you're not playing on Sunday or Saturday? Can you come and fill in? So I was able to do that for a number of weeks and basically just gave my time up free of charge and had some really good advice from guys like, you know, Ray and Steve Blocker Roach. He's been a really good mentor of mine just in life. And then I was fortunate enough the year that I retired, I offered my services to Fox Sports for free of charge. I said, I'll fly myself down from the Gold Coast free. I'll put myself up in my own accommodation. It won't cost you anything. And they just said, no, we want you to be part of the team. So I was fortunate enough to be first year out. I got part of the Fox Sports team and was there for a number of years and then transferred over to Channel 9 and then radio itself. I just think with media, I've always the advice I always got is don't try and be someone you're not. And also the really good advice I got was don't put up an argument if you don't truly believe it. And you see some people that will put up an argument, but they don't really believe in the stance they're taking. They're just trying to be controversial. They're trying to be opposite to their co-host that's next to them. So I never try and put up an argument that I don't truly believe in or a belief or some advice, whatever it may be, for the sake of the program. That was some of the really good advice I got. And most of all, you just try and be natural. But the most important thing is be accessible. Don't ever think you're better than the other person that's listening to you, and always make yourself accessible to anyone that wants to reach out to you.
Yeah, good point, Sats. Yeah, fair. Agree?
Yeah, Sats, thanks for everything, mate. Just one final question from me. What would a Scott Sattler in his late 40s say to a Scott Sattler in his early 20s?
Wow. Okay. He would say that when you got the offer to go to the Eastern Suburbs Roosters in 1994, I signed a 3-year contract. The advice to Scott Sattler back in his late teens, early 20s would have said, don't sign that contract. I went down to Sydney and I really struggled emotionally. And I came back, and fortunately enough, I came back to the South Queensland Crushers back in Queensland. But I wasn't ready emotionally to go to Sydney. And I didn't enjoy my time at all. So he would say to himself, don't go to Sydney at an early age.
Yeah.
And also he would say to a young Scott Sattler, when you get the opportunity to go to England at your end of the career, make sure you do it. Because I had the opportunity to go to Bradford the year after I retired. I would have been 32, and I didn't take it. And I should have. I should have packed up the young family. I should have gone to England. I should have experienced the world a little bit more, but I didn't. So yeah, that's the advice I would have given. And you know what? The other advice it would have been is that get a trade.
Yep.
Get a trade, because I didn't. I joined the police force when I was 17, and then I wasn't able to pursue that because I got my first contract in footy, and they weren't going to allow you to do both. And so I should have then gone and got a trade, and I didn't do that. And that's one thing I really regretted.
Thanks, Sats.
Sats, before we wrap it up, I'm going to ask you a 10-second question. It'll take you 10 seconds to work it out. We're talking about isolation and everything else at the moment. In your career, who would have been the greatest pest to be in isolation with?
Without a doubt, 100% would have been Brent Tate, because he's got OCD. He's a clean freak, and I'm really clean. But I was
going to say you're pretty organised.
Yeah, I'm actually, I've got some OCD tendencies, but he just takes it to another level, and he can't sit still. But without a doubt, the worst guy to ever be locked up and isolated with would be Jamie Goddard. Would be an absolute pest, because I've got no doubt that if he would have been diagnosed ADHD and would have had to take medication if he was a kid in this day and age. Yeah. Just a constant practical joker, but the practical jokes go too far. You can never sleep. I got ruined with him. We went on an inter-season trip once, and we had to pick out of a hat who we were going to get ruined with for the week. And for a guy that wasn't a big drinker, I got ruined with the worst, the biggest pest in the world, Jamie Goddard, for a week. So much so that I actually went and bought my own room for the final 5 days because I just couldn't put up with it.
Couldn't cop it anymore. Well, mate, Sats, you've had a great career, mate, and you're doing wonders with your media career. Great footballer, but even better bloke. Thanks for joining us on Two Good Sports, mate. And hopefully down the track, mate, we'll catch up again. But thanks very much from us, Sats.
Yeah,
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Sats.